You ever have one of those mornings where you wake up thinking life might finally calm down and then bam, everything you care about gets hit by a wrecking ball before you even finish your first cup of coffee? That was me not long ago, standing there in my granddad's old boots, trying to make sense of a world that suddenly felt like it was spinning out of control. I'd just inherited the family ranch after Grandpa Bob passed barely unpacked, still finding his old flannel shirts in drawers, learning to sleep through the midnight mooing of our herd. I thought my biggest problem was going to be figuring out how to keep the cattle out of Grandma's flower beds. Instead, what I got was an HOA president with a bulldozer, a fresh printed court order, and a grin like she'd already won the war. They flattened that red barn, 3 generations of Morrison sweat and Sunday morning arguments before lunch, all because they wanted to put in a community pool and get this make the neighborhood more modern, more safe. But what they didn't count on was that I wasn't alone out there. I had 40 horned, 4-legged bodyguards who knew exactly what it meant to protect home turf. When those gates swung open and my bull diesel led the charge, it was like watching a bovine army storm the beaches of Normandy, only noisier and way less organized. You know what I mean? That first stampede was just the opening act. The real story was about power, who gets it, who keeps it, and who's willing to bulldoze your whole life just because some suburban committee decides your family legacy is suddenly an eyesore. I never planned to fight a war for a ranch I barely knew how to run. But when you find yourself standing in your pajamas, shouting at a woman with a clipboard and a demolition crew, you start to realize pretty quick that the only way forward is straight through the fire. The letter from the HOA felt like a slap dated the very day we buried Grandpa, as if they'd circled his funeral on the calendar as the perfect moment to move in. So sorry for your loss, but progress waits for no one. Those words written in this dainty, flowery script by Victoria Sterling, the HOA president, hit harder than any legal notice ever could. I'd grown up hearing stories about this barn, how my great-granddad built it plank by plank with his own hands back in the 50s, how Grandpa expanded it bottle-fed diesel on the kitchen floor after finding him half dead in a ditch. Every nail in those boards meant something, but none of that mattered to Victoria or her committee. Turns out Grandpa had registered the ranch under HOA jurisdiction back in the 80s for a tax break, thinking nothing could touch us. He never imagined a day when corporate developers and HOA politics would team up to erase decades of family history. And Victoria, she'd turned her own tragedy, a son who drowned in a pool she designed, into a crusade to eliminate water hazards real or imagined from the county. Our pond, our well system, even the dew on the morning grass, suddenly it all had to go sacrificed at the altar of her grief. Diesel, though he knew something was coming, he started acting weird watching the road, sticking close to me, pressing that massive forehead against my chest like he was handing off some invisible torch. I'm just an IT guy, honestly never wrangled more than a Wi-Fi router until this happened. But looking into Diesel's eyes, feeling the weight of everything Grandpa left behind, selling out wasn't an option anymore. The next morning came the real showdown. I'm half-dressed, hair sticking up, and there's Victoria dressed for battle, flanked by county trucks and a guy who clearly hates his bulldozer job. "We have a court order," he mutters. Victoria flashes that icy smile, says something about an emergency session nobody told me about, and then drops a pile of paperwork so thick you could use it to fix a wobbly table. According to the fine print, my barn is now a health hazard, my livestock in imminent danger. She's savoring every syllable. But then Diesel decides he's had enough of bureaucracy. He charges 800 pounds of righteous fury straight at the bulldozer. Hydraulic fluid sprays everywhere, the crew scatters, and suddenly the rest of the herd is in on it. The cows, the goats, everyone's stampeding. Mrs. Chen from next door goes live on Facebook. Y'all, the cows are fighting back, and within minutes the whole neighborhood's watching. By noon, #Save Morrison Farm is trending, and Victoria for once looks like she's not in control. But here's the twist I didn't see coming: Mrs. Ruby Chen, who turns out to be a lawyer with a heart for lost causes and apparently a knack for speaking cow. She shows up boots and blazer and says she's here to represent property rights and me. She spots right away that Victoria's evidence is pure fiction numbers, copy-pasted from an industrial cattle operation miles away. Even better, Ruby and my neighbor Frank dig up old deeds proving our family owns the water rights for half the county, making Victoria's pool project as illegal as her meeting notice. That night, I drive by Victoria's place. Through the window, I see her, just a mom, talking to a photo of her kid crying so hard it makes me feel guilty for a split second. Later, my security cameras catch her sneaking onto my land at 2 a.m., measuring the pond's depth like she can erase her pain with a surveyor's rod. Turns out she's not the real villain, just a pawn in a bigger game. Some guy named Marcus Webb, corporate developer extraordinaire, is the one pulling the strings. Ruby and I go public. We start streaming live from the ranch. Diesel co-hosts, cows in the background, science experiments on the spot. The local news shows up, and so does Victoria, ready for a PR battle. She doesn't count on me broadcasting her arrival, or on Ruby's proof of her fake reports. Frank arrives with the original deeds, and in front of hundreds of viewers, Victoria's whole case unravels. She snaps, tears streaming, admits on camera that her fight is really about her lost son, not the neighborhood's safety. But the story doesn't end there. Victoria's ex-husband, David, shows up at a packed town hall, drops a bomb she's being manipulated by Webb, who's using her grief to gobble up land cheap for luxury developments. He's not just after my ranch, he's after hers too. Victoria finally sees it, and the whole community rallies behind us. Webb, thinking he's untouchable, rolls into the county office with an army of lawyers planning to sign the final permits. But Victoria, now fully on our side, shows up with receipts, bank statements, emails, recorded calls, all proving Webb's been scamming HOAs across the state. Reporters swarm his lawyers, freak out, and for the first time, Webb looks genuinely scared. Then I send Ruby a text, send in the reinforcements. 5 minutes later, the ground starts to shake. Diesel leads a parade of 40 cows right down Main Street, circling the county office like they own the place. People stop traffic to film kids chant "Cowpocalypse," and Webb gets to watch his empire collapse live, surrounded by hooves and mooing. Diesel blocks the door until Webb signs the permit, withdrawal hands shaking, and the crowd goes wild. 6 months later, Morrison Farm isn't just saved, it's thriving. We've started an agricultural education center. Ruby and I are planning our wedding in the same barn Victoria once tried to destroy. And Diesel, now officially sheriff of Main Street, greets the neighborhood kids every afternoon. Victoria runs a grief support nonprofit, helping families like hers without destroying anyone else's home. And Marcus Webb. Last I heard, he was hiding out in Florida, probably still terrified of cows. But if you ask me, the real lesson isn't about revenge or even justice. It's about standing up, about not letting anyone bully you out of what matters most, even when the odds feel impossible. Sometimes the right allies make all the difference. Sometimes it's your neighbor, sometimes it's a lawyer who talks to bulls, and sometimes it's just a stubborn herd that refuses to be moved. So here's my question. When push comes to shove, whose side are you really on? What would you do if everything your family built was threatened by someone who thinks power is all that matters? Let me know in the comments if you think justice was served or if you see it differently. Hit that like, subscribe for more wild stories about fighting back, and don't forget, sometimes history gets written by the folks with the most stubborn cattle.